So I also encourage you to quickly just occupy the seats that are in front so that we do not have to shout and scream. For you not to be looking around, also looking at the benches here, so you can just see people that are around you. Yeah, so the people sitting at the back are talking to you. Please just quickly move in front. So before we start, I would like 3 people to give me their expectations of today's discussion. What are your expectations like? Why are you here? What do you expect to learn after we are done with this discussion? 3 hands. We'll not start at you talk. Let's have 3 people. Or we'll random the points that we get. The gentleman from New Zealand, what are your expectations?
Information. Give me information. Give it up there.
Wait for the mic. You people write so well. Please speak up. Okay.
My name is Lusaka, because my expectations are to get new information and disseminate it out to the public.
Perfect. New information and disseminate it out to the public. Yes. Another hand from Mr. Guys.
Okay, so my expectation. So my expectation, I am hoping to hear people speak freely about the amendments to the Constitution so that we can see the analysis, like those that are for it and those that are against it, so that we can analyze the whole situation.
Thank you. And I love the point that she's made. People should speak freely. The tenets of a democracy is free speech. So immediately we are not able to freely express your opinion, then you are not in a democracy. But your right, the right to swing your arm, ends where my nose begins. So even as you express yourself freely, you express yourself freely in that you do not infringe the rights of the others. So attack the idea and not the person. Good afternoon again and welcome to the public debate on Zambia's constitution amendments. So to start our program this afternoon, I'll call upon Beta Kabeleke, who is the head of policy and programs at ActionAid Zambia, to come and give open remarks on behalf of the country director who is not here today. Let's give a round of applause as she comes.
I would like to acknowledge the presence of senior government officials in this meeting, political party representatives, leaders and representatives of civil society organizations, colleagues from the media, young people, activists, change makers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon to you all. My name is Beta Kabengere. I'm the Program and Policy Manager at ActionAid Zambia, and I will be giving the welcoming remarks on behalf of our country director, Ms. Finance Temba. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the second public debate on Zambia's proposed constitutional reforms, proudly supported by the government of Sweden through the Embassy of Sweden in Zambia. Today's discussion is both timely and critical as we navigate a process that will significantly reshape our supreme law and may have far-reaching implications for the future of Zambia's democracy. We are gathered here to deliberate on a matter that speaks directly to our country's democratic development and the inclusive participation of all citizens in governance. Constitutional reform is not merely about change for its own sake. It is about undertaking a process that is inclusive, people-driven, and responsive to the gaps that have been identified. It must aim to strengthen current provisions while upholding the supremacy of the Constitution and also enhance our systems of governance and institutional accountability. This People's Podium debate, held under the theme Roadmap for Constitutional Amendment and the Role of Civil Society, seeks to engage critical stakeholders such as ourselves in this room, civil society organizations, the media, academia, experts, and the general public. This is a meaningful dialogue on how we can collectively shape a constitution that truly reflects the will of the people and upholds the values of a strong and inclusive democracy. Such platforms are vital. They promote transparency, allow for airing of diverse perspectives, and help us build consensus on a process and outcome that serves all Zambians. We know that constitutional reform is often contentious, and achieving consensus, even among CSOs, is not always easy. As you have heard and seen and read, there's a lot of debate around the proposed amendments from the time that they were announced. That is why it is crucial that these discussions are held in good faith, with a shared commitment to protect and promote democratic principles. As civil society, we remain ready and willing to support initiatives that safeguard and deepen Zambia's democracy. It is imperative, therefore, that as a nation we continue to pursue progressive reforms. Every citizen has a duty to protect the Constitution, and your presence here today reflects a shared commitment to that obligation. As we engage in today's discussions, I encourage open, respectful, and constructive dialogue. Let us explore innovative solutions that can help strengthen our constitutional framework, reinforce the rule of law, and ensure the rights of all Zambians are protected, promoted, and guaranteed. On behalf of ActionAid Zambia, and indeed the country director, we look forward to an insightful debate that will emerge from today's deliberations. As we work together towards a constitution that is fair, inclusive, and truly democratic, I would like to thank you all and let the debate begin. Thank you.
Let's give another round of applause to the head of policy and programs at ActionAid Zambia. Now, to help us engage, borrow our words in respectful, constructive debate dialogue this afternoon, I will quickly introduce the panel, and I'll ask them to come up front and take a seat, and then I will explain the format in which the debate will flow. Our first panelist is Mr. Gilbert Musonda, who is the Executive Director of Advocates for Democratic Governance, ADEG. And the next panelist is Mr. Patrick Kaupa, who is the Executive Director of Governance, Elections, Advocacy, Research, GEARS. And last but not least, Mr. Lusaka, who is the Executive Director of Chapter 1 Foundation. Let's give them a round of applause as they come. Okay, just a correction. The name is Gideon Musonda. Yes.
And the organization?
Advocates for Democracy Governance Foundation.
Advocates for Democratic Governance Foundation.
Democratic, not democracy.
No, Democratic
Thank
Governance
you, thank you,
Foundation.
thank you. Okay, so, and apologies for that. This is the format that our discussion is going to follow this afternoon. Each panelist is going to be given 3 minutes in which you are going to make an opening statement explaining your position on the matter. And then after which, we are going to have thematic question rounds, in which I will throw a question to the panelists that should respond to the audience. And then I will also ask a few follow-up questions for clarity's sake. And then we are going to have an open dialogue among the panelists if you wish to respond to something that your fellow panelists said. And then after which we are going to throw it to the audience for an open Q&A. Is that clear? Perfect. So we will start from my far right with the open statements.
Hello, good evening. Hello. First of all, I think I want to appreciate the invitation to participate in the constitution debate, which has taken effect countrywide. I believe that this is a healthy situation currently going on in the country. Us being a democratic country, you will appreciate that I think this is how it's supposed to be, where people can express views, can make suggestions, can make a healthy debate is a way of growing our democracy. At the end of the day, I'm sure that either people who garner general consensus or eventually broader consensus, so that certain decisions can be made by the government of the government currently which is there. In terms of position, from what has been said here by the moderator, we waited to hear what the government wanted to do in terms of proposals, which eventually I think were tabled in Parliament by the Minister of Justice. And out of the proposals, we think that our position is that there are some articles that we think are worth being supported. At the same time, in other words, we agree with certain provisions, but at the same time, we also disagree. In other words, we don't 100% agree with all that has been proposed. We think that certain provisions need to be revisited or adjusted, and we have made, I think, proposals or rather suggestions on what needs to be done. I think that is our position. So there are some proposals that we think definitely they are worth being supported. There are also some provisions that we definitely don't disagree, so we don't agree with, which we think that they will need revisiting and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So, just a brief about our organization. So, I'm representing the organization, as it was mentioned, Advocates for Democratic Governance Foundation, whose mandate is to promote and defend democracy and human rights. And part of the mission in terms of how we implement our mandate is to advocate for legal reforms. And this platform is appropriate, for us to even advocate further and also engage in effective, conversation around this. I would like to also thank the organizers for bringing us together, especially when we have views, Then, I would like to outright give our position on this subject. We are on the opposite side in terms of the government approach or manner in which they are undertaking this constitutional reform process. We are not opposed to constitutional reforms. I think I need to set this clear, because it's something that we have been advocating for a long time, and we are not content with the current provisions. We have experienced it in terms of implementation, and it has brought out problems that we need to truly reform for us to have a better constitution that will enhance our democracy. For further arguments, obviously, we will need to further guide in terms of how we flow with the debate. Yeah, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I will quickly go over Chapter 1 Foundation's position on constitutional reforms. And we are opposed to these reforms because of the content and the process. Process protects the content, and process is aligned to the context, and context informs the content and the approach that is to be taken. A constitution is a covenant between the governed and the governors. We do not let the governors dictate how we, the people, should limit their power. It should be us to dictate how we limit the powers of those in government. The proposed approach and the proposed process do not address the main challenges that Zambians face. So Zambians have called for limiting executive power. Where in these reforms is the executive power limited? Zambians have called for greater judicial autonomy. Where in these reforms is judicial independence and autonomy found? Zambians have called for a stronger National Assembly that can provide effective oversight over the executive. Where in these reforms is effective oversight over the executive? Zambians have called for greater institutional accountability. Nowhere in these reforms is institutional accountability. Can you find institutional accountability? Instead, the reforms can be interpreted to enhance the executive influence over the National Assembly. The reforms can be interpreted to further centralize power into national level actors, which undermines the essence of democracy and the things Zambians have been calling for. Like Mr. Msonda said, we appreciate the need for constitutional reforms, but to address the needs that we have as Zambians, they have to be done right. And this is not the right way to do it.
Thank you. So we'll quickly get into the main content of this debate, and I will start with my favorite again, which is gears. Yes. In your opening statement, you mentioned that you agree with part of the amendments, the part of the proposed 14 amendments, and could you then quickly just clarify the part of the amendments that you agree with and why, and also just a last question, why do you think it's even justified to have those proposed amendments at this time?
From our take, we are basically election. Our main focus and the thematic area is elections actually. So we think that we have issues here that we have been of great concern even before the proposed amendments were tabled. For example, we pushed one thing through the executive. One item we have been struggling to make sure that it's amended even before these things were, from 2022 up to almost now. We have wanted to see that the executive, because the right, out of the three, we thought that the right arm of government to deal with that is the executive, and that's the Public Order Act, where we have been leading a consortium of 23 other organizations to have the Public Order Act, which, as you know, has been quite a thorny issue for the past, I think, almost 60 years now, and where we have seen successive governments making commitments and so on, but with little changes. So we have, you know, it's one issue we have seriously pursued, especially starting from 2022 up to now, where I think we have almost reached a stage where the government finally, as you may be aware, is in public domain, that the issue now, the bill is almost before cabinet, so that changes can be made. And you can imagine, like I did mention, that that's an issue we feel that it also supports the electoral process in so many ways. People expressing themselves, people conducting campaigns, people going about associating with each other and so forth and so on. And we have seen how this has been difficult over the period, I think from way back, whenever we have elections, we have seen how I'm just trying to show that we didn't just wake up to support, but that there are things we have been, that we think, although it's not one of those issues that has been, I think, added on the whatever, but we think it's a only issue in the electoral process, definitely. And then also, you may wish to know that we also tabled another issue to another arm of government, which is the judiciary, way before even these amendments were made. You may be interested to know that he has actually petitioned the Constitutional Court over the issue, and this is the item which has also been included on the amendments over the issue of candidates. That is amendment to Article 52.6, need to revise the provision for relating to filing of fresh nominations on resignation of candidates in an election. We, at that time, we found that it was a big problem, and you remember we're coming from a background where we had issues on the Kwacha, Kabushi, and other places, especially in to do with independent candidates. There was a pattern where we saw people were being sponsored to withdraw and so forth and so on. So eventually we thought that what it did was that after just about a day or so before the election, somebody withdraws. This resulted in what? People have to start afresh. You can imagine people that have already filed their nominations, that they have to start afresh. It was also a cost on the government and the ECZ, because they had to start printing the ballot papers again and so forth and so on. So we think that this is a justifiable, I think, article that needs to be amended. Of course, what we found out that after the pronouncement by the Constitutional Court, they attended to, I must say, 50% of the issue, because definitely they dealt with the issue of independence. If you are withdrawing after whatever, the current stand is that if you're an independent candidate, whether it's presidential or MP or councillor withdraws after filing of nominations, the election will still go ahead. There will not be cancelled. And I think we have played a part as gears in addressing that. Unfortunately, the judgment didn't address the component of the party candidate withdrawal. So for now, if a party candidate withdraws, it means that the election will still go ahead. And so we feel that this article definitely needs to be amended in order to have fairness in the in the electoral process, and also to avoid wastage of resources, wastage of time, and the inconvenience that may arise. The other provision that we feel that we wanted to, that we are in agreement and support with is amendment to Article 73.2. One is that is 1015 and 1032. This is the amendment to do with the hearing and the determination of an election petition, which you, as you may see, that this is not a contentious issue as well. What we found difficult in the past, especially the last election, was that there's the issue of 90 days in which people need to petition either at councillor level or MP. Up to now, it's not known whether when you do the petition, is the hearing by the court going to be done within 90 days, or 90 days is only reserved for the hearing, then the determination later. And what we have seen is that some of the candidates have definitely been inconvenienced badly to an extent that certain matters went all the way until maybe a month before dissolving Parliament without determining that. We think that needs to be addressed. And then the other part also that we found quite very, you may be aware that we also had the almost crisis in that was I think in 2016, where there was a controversy regarding the Constitutional Court in determining whether the 14 days was just for hearing or the 14 days were for determination. As you may be aware, such type of issues, I think, if not well addressed and handled carefully, we think have got potential to put definitely the country on fire. So we think that there should be clarity. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that there should be clarity, and we think this is a worthy undertaking to do. There should be clarity on how long regarding hearing and the determination. The other clause that we find worthy supporting is what has come out from various review commissions, and we think that it's also not very contentious. Zambians generally have complained about the wastage of resources because of the numerous by-elections that are definitely taking place throughout the cycle, the electoral cycle. So many, by-elections are costing quite a lot. We think that there can be a system that can be designed so that the costly by-elections are done away with, and something can be worked out so that parties can still definitely find a way of replacing a candidate as need be. I think generally that is why we think that these need to be supported. I'm not very sure whether.
Thank you very much. You have answered the question very well, and which brings me to the next question that I have. You mentioned that you do not agree with the approach and manner in which it is done. But I think with the way he's alluded his points, I am. If I was not a citizen of this country and I'm given that approach, I would definitely agree with him. Because the challenges that he's raised that are faced in terms of how the electoral process is delayed, how resources are misappropriated, and even building on to what Mr. Josiah said, these funds then could then be used to what we call the other sectors that he said should then be efficient for in terms of progress. So building on that, then why should the approach and manner be a challenge when the end goal of this, as he's explained, is actually the better scenario that we have now in terms of the electoral?
Thank you very much. Allow me to start from what the President himself mentioned when he addressed Parliament in 2021. Because it's extremely important, talking about principle of how we can develop the good constitution. So let me quote what he said. This was in 2021, the first time he addressed Parliament, the first session. So the President made a commitment on this constitutional reform. And I just want to quote what he said. With respect to constitutional reforms, our government will complete the constitutional reform agenda anchored on broad-based consensus among all our people. Not a section of our people, but all our people. Further, we will revive the process of expanding the Bill of Rights to integrate economic, social, and cultural rights. If you go to the speech, you will find this either in terms of the verbatim that was produced on Parliament. Yeah, it should be Parliament platform. So, the principle of developing a good constitution, just like Josiah referred to, there has to be broad-based consensus, not only on the content, but also on the process. So for us, what is paramount is firstly to have the constitution or the process that will take the bottom-up approach. What is happening now? It's the up-bottom approach. Remember that in the sector, as CSOs, we have been going for a people-driven constitution. So we refer to the constitution where the people themselves should drive the process and should also determine what should be contained in the constitution. So, what is happening is a complete opposite of what the president committed himself and believing in himself and according to the best practices of constitution making. There has to be that broad-based consensus on the constitution reform. So, it's not more to do with the content. Because if the process is compromised, no matter how you can come up with the good content, the content can be affected. For example, we have been on this path before. This is the same path that has failed us to come up with a people-driven constitution that can stand a test of time. We are going back to seek amendments to the constitution because, like we have done patches to the constitution, partial amendment. Our position is that if we engage in a process that will be comprehensive, emanating from broad-based consultation and consensus among the citizens, then we are sure of the good content that the people will accept and live with. So, Mr. Moderator, for us, it's a call on government to hold this process and let's have a conversation to continue with the process. process after the 2026. I earlier said we have been on this pathway and it failed. The current environment is not conducive for the good constitution reform process. Why? Political polarization. We are divided as a nation. This is an environment that is close to elections, where usually the political temperature is high, where we disagree, we tend to disagree almost on anything. So why can't we embark on a pathway that will surely bring about the desired outcome, that is the good constitution? Remember, ladies and gentlemen, in 2016, we had a referendum. You can go back to the context of the referendum. Progressive. But the process failed. Guess what? The reason for that failure of a good document, even if we have to implement it, now, it's something that we can applaud. Something that we can applaud and move with. But it failed because of the politicization of the process. Already on the proposed content, we are seeing the conversation. So, when we were advising government as CSOs to quickly embark on the constitution making process immediately, they were elected. It's because we were avoiding this situation here. For me, the right time is to do that consensus building around the constitution reform at the time when you are enjoying that honeymoon, when you have that fresh mandate, when almost everyone wants to work with you, such that even if to some extent, colleagues, there is time as CSOs, sometimes we are a bit quiet when the government, is elected. And it's time we give chance to government, to implement its program. Yeah? We wait to see, the direction if they are implementing the programs according to the elections, campaign. For me, situations where we were having almost everyone wanting to work with you, even those in the opposition who were strong opponents to you would want to associate with yourself. Defections here and there. I think for me it's time to build consensus. Not to wait election before or election year for you to embark on that important exercise. So largely, despite agreeing to some of the proposed amendments, and having learned, from experience, we are afraid that even if we are to agree on the perfect content of the Constitution, it may be, compromised because of the approach, the approach that has been undertaken. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. And moving on to chapter 1, in your remarks you mentioned that we are more quote-unquote bigger problems that we have. Like there are certain issues that we've been advocating for, especially as Chapter 1, issues of reducing the powers of the executive, ensuring the judiciary is free and fair, which is perfectly fine. But then also, there are other sectors of civil society that have been advocating for the very amendments that have been proposed. And even looking at the bigger question that you mentioned, that there are other major challenges that the amendment process should have focused on. But however, I think if we look at all the 13 amendments, if I just randomly pick one, like the first one, constitutional delimitation, there are arguments that MPs make that their constituencies are too big for them to properly navigate. And there are other sectors of civil society that say that we must divide for development to be spread. Now, I want you to answer this question this way. It's actually two parts. If the amendment process included issues of ensuring the judiciary is free and fair, and ensuring that the powers of the executive are reduced, could you hold a position as Chapter 1 for the amendment to be justified? And then, if not, you can explain that.
So, as Chapter 1 Foundation, our position has been that we need comprehensive constitutional reform. And the reason for why we call for comprehensive constitutional reform is if you undertake piecemeal reforms, as Zambia has in the past, we end up entrenching existing power structures. So, if you recall, in 2016, we amended the Constitution, and several provisions were amended. It's almost a new document. But the power structures that inform it still remain the same. So you need to review the Constitution from the roots and design a power structure that works for the Zambian people, that shifts power away from the executive. And piecemeal approaches to amending the Constitution only entrenches the power of the executive. I can give an example. If Parliament in its current structure, you increase the number of MPs and increase the number of nominated MPs, does Parliament get stronger, or is the executive that gets stronger by having more numbers in the executive? Parliament right now cannot provide effective oversight over the executive. If an MP is not happy with something government has done, they walk out of Parliament or they post on social media. That's what Zambians do. We need more from our MPs. They are empowered by the Constitution to provide oversight. Let's make that oversight effective. So on to the question you asked, whether if the reforms included some of the issues we've been advocating for would support the process. We might, because again, we shouldn't say we're going to include strengthening the autonomy of the judiciary alone as a piecemeal component. It has to be part of a broader conversation around reviewing the entirety of the Constitution and the power structures that inform the Constitution. Something Zambians often grapple with is how do institutions better work for the Zambian people? If an institution is not accountable to the people, how can it serve their interests? If as a judge, I'm beholden to the executive for appointing me, how can I then make a decision that overturns the decision of the executive? Those are some of the questions we have to ask ourselves and go to the root of how we design our governance system and share power amongst the organs of the state, but also empower ourselves as citizens in terms of how we can make the government accountable. On the issue of delimitation, the first point that the minister raised, delimitation is being sold as a way to enhance resources available to constituencies. I'd like to read firstly the functions of the National Assembly. So Article 63 of the Constitution, Article 63.2, provides the powers of the National Assembly. The National Assembly shall oversee the performance of the executive functions by A, ensuring equity in the distribution of national resources amongst the Zambian people. B, appropriating funds for expenditure by state organs, state institutions, provincial administration, local authorities, and other bodies. That's the function of National Assembly. It's not the size of constituencies that is prohibiting National Assembly from allocating more resources to where it's needed. It's something else. And aside from this, the Constitution also provides for a local government equalization fund, which is a fund which is supposed to bring about equity in the distribution of resources to constituencies. There's no discussion about this. So within the current law, there's a framework for equitable distribution of resources. So it's not correct to say we need to delimit to give you more money. At the last public forum, Ms. Meeti gave an example of students in a boarding house, 3 students in a boarding house, and each contributes 500 kwacha for food. Then after some time, they realized the 1,500, which is 500, which each one contributes, is not enough for them to sustain them over a month. And then they decide, so because we need 2,000, let's invite somebody else to be contributing 500. Then we'll get the 2,000 we need. That's not a logical solution to the problem. The solution is for people to increase how much they're contributing. So Parliament is empowered currently to give more resources to constituencies that need it. That's what Parliament should do. They shouldn't sell delimitation as being the solution for that. Then also, the Constitution provides the matters to take into account when delimiting the constituency. This is Article 59, so this is the law. And it says, the Electoral Commission shall, in delimiting the boundaries of constituencies and wards, take into account the history, diversity, and cohesiveness of the constituency or ward. B, have regard to the population density, trends, and projections. Ensure that the number of inhabitants in each constituency or ward is reasonable, taking into account the means of communication and the geographical features. Ensure that constituencies and wards are wholly within districts, and E, seek to achieve an approximate equality of constituency and ward population, subject to the need to ensure adequate representation for urban and sparsely populated areas. Those are the grounds that ECZ is supposed to consider when delimiting constituencies. Where does it mention size? Because best practice dictates these are the issues that should be considered when delimiting constituencies. So I think what this process has done is it's denied Zambians the opportunity to interrogate, firstly, what the problems are, where the problems lie, and what the solutions are. And framing them as contentious and non-contentious is also insulting of our intelligence. Take, for instance, by-elections. Yes, how many people here want by-elections? Many people believe they are a waste of resources. So what's the solution? That's where the contentiousness arises. What is the solution? What do you replace by-elections with? Should it be a party to select a candidate? What if it's an independent? That's why you need consideration by the public. In this roadmap that the government has given, where do we debate the different solutions? There's no process for debating the solution. So government says it's received submissions. On what basis has it taken a submission made by Mr. Msonda of the submission I have made? At what point do the public get to interrogate the different submissions and why government has taken some and rejected others? So to reiterate the points that have been addressed here, there are issues with the content, a lot of issues with the content, but there are issues with the process as well. And that's why we're saying, make a strategic approach to this process. Let's build consensus, let's agree so that everybody supports the process. Constitution making should ideally unite the country. As we build on agreements in terms of the process, build in terms of agreements on the content, we're uniting as a country. And at the end of it, we're saying this is our document. But the way it's being done, is it uniting or dividing? That should tell us about what this process is about. I don't know that's the question.
Thank you for that very well thought and candid response. And back to Mr. Kawamba in our last line before we open for the open plenary panels. You mentioned on the issues that you agree with. I think your arguments to support were fairly justified. But then there's another school of thought that say, and based on what the other two panelists have said, looking at how this is really just politically motivated. because if you look at most of the key components that they're trying to propose, we will definitely be in favor of whichever government comes into power. They will literally have an upper hand. And then another argument is also on the issue of affirmative action and how they say if we have designated number of seats for the women and the youths, then that's justified. But then again, if you look at countries that have literally followed process of affirmative action, is that you only create a competitive environment for a certain segment of people. And then you end up electing youths not because they are qualified, but just because they are youths. Women not because they are qualified, but just because they are women. And then you create a certain segment of them to only compete through. And then what that does is the larger objective of having high representation is if I'm a young person and I qualify to stand, I must be able to compete even with the older MP. But then with that issue of affirmative action coming in, I am then sidelined and told, no, there is a seat for you to battle for and not the main seat. And then what then creates now is an issue of inequality, which in future then we will have to battle with, because almost every country that has taken the form of affirmative action has sort of taken it back. So based on the even issues that you agree with, then how do you differentiate this? That this is literally just being politically motivated, because why are we making a constitution when we are only almost a year and a few months from an election?
My take is that I'll definitely go back to maybe ask why amend a constitution. That's the first maybe thing I will say. The next point is there a process that allows amendments to be done? If I'm to be very correct, what has been proposed by the government is amendment to the constitution. But the focus here, and I believe that there are two things. For me, there are two things. There is the amendment to the constitution, and there is constitution making. These are two different processes. So definitely, if you have to question, that's why my colleagues say, definitely that's the opinion. And this is the beauty of democracy. Each of us is allowed to express his views, his opinion, how he thinks, and so forth and so on. That is excellent. And definitely this is what you want to see, without really, going at each other's throat. You are okay with your, with your position, your stand, as long as you are able to justify why you think that should be done. So for me, the fact that almost everywhere you go where there is a constitution, there is a provision for amendment. Okay, that's the first point I would like to mention. Second point is I ask myself whether in our constitution is there a provision that it gives a process for amendment. Okay, because currently I'm trying to go the route of what has been put on the table. That thing I believe is what we are supposed to, but somebody can say, no, let's not follow what has been put on the table. Let's go this way or attempt it this way. What has been put on the table as a process is the amendment of the constitution. Like I said, for me there are two processes altogether. There is constitution making, which definitely I agree with my colleague here. I think at the far right there. As far as the constitution making is concerned, you definitely need broad consensus. But for amendments, we have seen even in the past, the process is well stipulated definitely in Article 79, as far as carrying out amendments is concerned. And also the issue of people's participation also is well for both processes. I think the main difference is that the first one, if it is constitution making, there is broader participation of the people. And if there is the amendment to the constitution, is limited participation of the people. But ultimately, all of which there is participation of the people at the end of the day. And what has been put on the table is definitely amendment to the constitution. So I believe that even in both cases, you see that the public will still participate, the public will still put input. When I mean the public, is the people. Whatever categories or groupings or institutions we belong to, will still participate in both processes. We still participate as people. We can make some. It's only a pity that I think there's been a trend in the past here, and it's not only for this government, but we have seen successive governments do almost the same. Whether it is broad, whatever, you remember most of these previous attempts that were made, actually, they were constitutional making processes. But eventually you see that at the end of the day, it is the will of those in government which prevails. Most of the time what we have seen is that is where the challenge I see myself. Most of the time we have seen that what people what people submit when the processes are undertaken and so on, sometimes very little is taken on board. At the end of the day, you see that a lot of things are not taken on board, and no wonder why we have contentious issues in the constitution-making process in the country. Almost everything we have done has resulted in the same because of, I think, those approaches and the stance. It's a pity that my little experience of the Zambian politician after the UNIP era, that is starting from MMD, PF, and whatever, that when people are in opposition, they will tell you, maybe I must say they will stand with you as the people in terms of this we shall do, this we shall change, this we shall do. But immediately they go into power, it is the other way around. They look at what they think will be safe well for them and so on. And immediately again, there have been so many successive people who have been in power and back to, when they are back to the fold, they join us as citizens, you hear them again cry, and yet when they had the opportunity of making changes and whatever, things like that doesn't happen. But we hope that, the moderator was saying, both inputs which I've said here, there is a provision for people to input in the processes. We hope those can be taken on board, when the bill is drafted and also at the time when it is taken to Parliament. We hope that the input of the people can still be accommodated and changes can be made. That is the ideal situation. It's a pity that sometimes the executive interests seem to be so supreme as compared to the people's, I think, interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very interesting submission. Okay, so you can quickly react to what he says, and then after this, we're going to open it up to the Q&A part. Before we do, after you respond, so I want you to talk about now what, based on the process that you raised, and which sounds quote-unquote scary, what is the role now of civil society? Is there a way we can participate in this process for it not to go through? Or is there a way, or is it just for us to just sit back? Yeah, so basically, what is the role of civil society? Yes, Mr.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to agree with his latter in his submission, where he has mentioned that it's the practice. When people come up with the content, not everything is taken. So what assurance do we have that if we come up with a content that is desirable, that it will be passed without leaving out anything? Past experiences have shown us that politicians do the picking those provisions that probably will consolidate their stay in power, and leave out other people's submission. So this is going back to the position I gave on ADIC, as well as other civil society organizations who are opposed to the process. But what's extremely important to address the concern that he has raised is to have a process, an agreed process that will also protect the content. For example, we can develop a legal framework that will guide how the process will be protected. e.g., when the agreed content of the citizens goes to cabinet or parliament, it just goes there for enactment. The assumption is that there was broad consultation, both the members of parliament and the citizens were actively engaged. So there is no need for them to change the agreed content that has been developed. So, colleagues, if we go with this process, I can assure you that government still deserves the powers to also go and have the mini debate within cabinet, and as the usual practice, cherry pick the provisions that will be advanced for enactment. Already, we've heard that the ERTC have submitted its report, and on the issue of the limitation, the issue has been left to be determined by government. How is that issue non-contentious? It's government that will come up, for example, with the number of how many constituencies can be, delegated. So what I'm saying is that we have been on this path, and this path has not produced the desired outcome. The content has always been changed. So it's important that we agree on the process and how the submitted content will be protected so that the people's views are represented. So there was mention of constitution making versus constitution amendment. For me, it still comes to the same issue. You are depending on what people agree, the submission of the citizens. So when you want to make changes, why not go and consult? I think that's a great approach we can undertake. Now, when you go with these proposed amendments in government's eye, it's that they are not non-contentious. But the implementation of those provisions, ladies and gentlemen, those are contentious. They will change. They will be governed ourselves. And this process seems to be an open, process. There are other provisions people or some sectors have proposed to include. So anything can be thrown in, just as we anticipate that anything can be thrown out. So even those
fears others have that there could be introduction of those undesirable processes. It's possible because the process will be open for them. I submit.
So, in terms of what civil society can do, unfortunately, it's not an answer or something for civil society alone. It's for every Zambian. What can we do? There are different views with varying perspectives. Some support the process, some don't. But government should facilitate dialogue and conversations where we can agree. Maybe some arguments around supporting the process might convince me and other organizations might be able to convince others. But the point of government should facilitate this dialogue. We also have to be honest and frank with ourselves about these reform processes. For example, in the minister's roadmap, in the government's roadmap, the government received the report from the Electoral Commission of Zambia on the 22nd of April, and on the 23rd, they began drafting a bill. The Constitution provides, in relation to limitation, and I'll read the excerpt from the roadmap and I'll read what the Constitution says. So, on the 22nd of April, receipt of the Electoral Reforms Technical Committee report from the Electoral Commission of Zambia by the Minister of Justice relating to the delimitation of constituencies, by-elections, electoral system for enhancement of participation of women and persons with disability. Then on the 23rd, the Minister of Justice started drafting. So they received it on the 22nd and began drafting on the 23rd. What does the Constitution say about ECZ's decision in relation to delimitation? Article 58(7) says, a person may apply to the Constitutional Court for review of a decision of the Electoral Commission made under this article. And this is the article on constituencies, wards, delimitation. So, if somebody is aggrieved by the decision of ECZ right now, how can they challenge it? ECZ hasn't even shared this report. What do we challenge? They are drafting the bill already. Do we challenge the bill? The law itself envisages a situation where you can challenge the decision of ECZ, but ECZ hasn't even shared that report. So we have to be honest with ourselves on whether this process is genuine and legitimate and addresses the concerns that many Zambians have. Then I understand the points and arguments around the difference between constitution making and constitutional amendment, but the principles remain the same. They should be informed by citizens' participation. And our constitution actually doesn't make the distinction. It provides in Article 79 the process for amending the constitution. And the government is calling this the legislative route because that's what the law provides. But there are other provisions in the law that also talk about how laws should be developed. And specifically, and these are arguments that we've made repeatedly around Bill 10. So, Article 8 of our Constitution provides national values and principles. These are the values and principles which we the Zambians say we should be governed by. And they include democracy and constitutionalism, human dignity, equity, social justice, equality, non-discrimination, good governance, integrity, sustainable development. Article 9 provides how these values and principles should be applied. Firstly, to the interpretation of law. Secondly, to the enactment and interpretation of, so firstly, to the interpretation of the Constitution. Secondly, to the enactment and the interpretation of law. So when is law, how is law enacted? Isn't it a process? How do these values and principles reflect in the process that has been advanced by government? Does it reflect the values of good governance and democracy, where we, the people, choose how we should be governed? It doesn't. So civil society needs to be honest with itself about what this process is intended to achieve. We need to be able to raise civic education amongst the Zambian people, because ultimately this document, the Constitution, belongs to them and not only to civil society. We also need to be able to facilitate and speak truth to power. We can't accept the status quo. We shouldn't be waiting for the government to tell us what it wants to amend. We should tell the government, you wait and listen to what the citizens want. And the point on waiting on the government to tell us what they want to amend. This entire process, from the 13 points that the government wants to amend, the drafting process that's going on right now, government has said there'll be a 30-day window for us to discuss, for consultations. What they're essentially doing is limiting our consultations to what government perspectives are. What about the citizens' concerns? Where do they raise those concerns as part of the process? It's being left out. We're limited to debating these 13 points that government has proposed and the report from ECZ, undermining already existing constitutional provisions that require accountability, that require transparency on the part of ECZ. So when you look at all these issues together, does that tell you that this is a process that is informed by good faith, or it's a process that is designed to undermine the interests of the Zambian people? For us, it undermines the interests of the Zambian people, and that's why we don't support the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's give them a round of applause. We'll take a few rounds of questions from the audience for panelists. We can have 3 in the first set. If you have a question, just raise your hand. So we'll have 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, so in the first round we'll have 3 questions. Somebody please go first. So we start with the lady. Just raise your hand again.
Good afternoon. My name.
Just switch your hand.
Good afternoon. My name is Pablo Chideshe. I'm first year student in the University of Zambia, pursuing a bachelor's degree in early childhood education. My question is, how will the amendments impact marginalized groups such as women, youth, and persons with disabilities? Then my second question is, what measures will be taken to ensure that the amendments do not revise progressive gains made in areas like human rights and social justice? Thank you.
Thank you. It's part of the
Let me also take the route of speaking while seated. I have a chain of stuff to say, but I think for now, if given another chance, I'll speak more. But let me just speak to a question related to what my lady here has asked. And I think this is also related to the issue of whether it's constitutional making or constitutional amendment. I know that government has proposed a number of items, I think 13 items if I'm not mistaken. And amongst those is an issue to do with the change in the system of the electoral process. And that is a fundamental change. And I know that, yes, they are rethinking some of these things. No wonder the issue of an open-ended number of MPs to be nominated was actually reversed, and an approach was rendered by the leadership. But I think this is quite unfair and unfortunate, especially on the Zambians. Now my question is, that is a fundamental change, because when you change the electoral process, you bring in a mixed member proportional representation system or a mixed member system, whatever it is, changing from the first past the post and also from the majoritarian system. It means fundamentally your governance changes. Fundamentally the way you run the electoral process changes. And that is not an amendment. That is to do with the constitution making. And it deserves to get to the people so that they agree and say this is what we want. And the system of mixed member proportional representation that we want as a people is this, because there are so many systems. So if government is going to make that decision, if they are doing bills now, what system are they choosing? What is it agreed by the Zambian people? So these are very contentious, and maybe you can answer that because it's related to the issue of amendment and also constitution making. But in ending, I would like to say that the leadership has an opportunity to make things better for citizens. I think the other panelists did mention that government was called upon for a very long time after they formed the political party in government, after they formed government in 2021. And I think those calls fell on deaf ears. Excuses were given, and one of the fundamental excuses that were given was that we are looking at issues that affect people, and the issues that affect people are the economy. Now the question we are asking ourselves, has the economy become better now than in 2021? And they must now stop looking at the economy and change to look at the constitution. And indeed, people are not disagreed to ensuring that the constitution is made better. But I think it's disagreement on the process. And this, as citizens, not only as civil society, we must watch closely, because this is gonna affect our lives going forward. If we don't really watch this carefully, as citizens, we will live to regret. So let's participate, engage, so that we may give our opinion and debate. And if it means rejecting, let us reject. If it means agreeing, please, let's agree. But I think fundamentally what the other panelists have said is that the process is not agreed. When you have a flawed process, you don't expect a better in the context or context.
Thank you so much. Let's have the last hand put up.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shaka Chana, as a concerned citizen of the country for Zambia. So basically, my first question goes to the panel.
Sorry, just introduce yourself again.
Shaka Chana, a concerned citizen of the country for Zambia. My question goes to the first panel, or the panel. How then do civil society organizations and NGOs, as well as non-profit organizations, challenge the constitution while their submissions are not being heard? Or rather, how can they navigate the process of representing the people while people they represent, their voices are not being heard? Apart from that question, I would like to pose another question to the non-citizen on my left, Jacqueline. I hear you talk of sometimes constitutional meaning are a priority of the executive, of which in this context the executive is the government. The very question is, what does the government do? Basically, there is no government against the people of Zambia. So if we are going to sit around people and say the executive's priorities are considered mostly, then they don't be a good citizen as well.
Sorry to cut you short. They are saying the questions are not clear. They said the questions are not clear. So will you repeat the first question?
The first question was for both panel.
Okay, just hold the mic with that.
Okay. The first question was for both panel. How do civil society organizations, non-governmental organizations, as well as non-profit organizations get to challenge the constitution if their submission submissions are not put into consideration. I'm taking that as a difference prior to the newly enacted law, which was signed on the Cybersecurity Act as well as the Cybersecurity Act, where civil society organizations submissions were not put into consideration.
Okay.
Apart from that question,
Sorry, did you get that? Okay. So move on to the next question now.
the second question is going to the Sam project. You mentioned something which I quote, sometimes the executive priorities are brought into consideration rather than the people's priorities. Then in this context, you're referring the executive to the government. But the question I'd like to pose to you, what is the government playing for? If the government is able to, for example, which I believe they should put the people's Zambia's priorities as a consideration. Apart from that, you give what I mentioned to say, we believe the issue of by-elections really has to do with wasting resources. From the little education that I've gotten from the school, I believe each and every candidate, for them to be nominated or rather stand for a position, there is a certain amount of fee they pay for them to contest. Again, it comes back to the same fee being used to carry out ballot papers. So I would then just sit and say we should put clauses to the issue of by-election to avoid misuse of public resources. While it's the same government that is wasting money, while it's the same government that
Sorry, please ask the question.
I want to ask the question you're asking me, sir.
Yeah.
While it's the same government that is wasting money, putting your banknote that does not put anything to the poverty of the people of Zambia. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a wonderful question. From a consensus, okay, so they'll quickly respond, and then we'll have the last round of questions from. Okay, let them quickly respond. And please, if in the response they answer the question, let's not have a question. Please, it's okay not to ask.
I think I only pick one from the other two questions because of the position of the mouth, the microphone. It was difficult to really get the question properly. I think my colleagues here did mention the role of civil society in these issues of legislation and so on. Basically, they form into three categories. We do advocacy. That's the first category. In other words, we propose changes, we put input when there are these processes, whether it's constitution making and whatever. Whether those will be taken on board or not, we have limitations. We can't say whether you like it or not. At the end of the day, government, interests will rule supreme. If I'm to give an example, over just the last, the cyber whatever and so on, the civil society, I think a consortium of about 70 or so, we teamed up and put up, I think, efforts to try to make sure that we make, proper interventions to the law that was about to be done and so on. The government, I think, reversed back. They withdrew those provisions, made negotiations. Some of the people that you are seeing here went to State House. There were some meetings. We are sure that changes will come and so on and so forth. After those negotiations and so on, later on we saw the bill going back. Literally, it was almost the same. Minor changes. That's why I say the civil society, we can do what we can, but we have got limitations. Beyond that, sometimes the interest of the executive, the drafters, sometimes they overrule what we can only do so much. But we will not create the processes because we are limited by whatever. We will try to do what we can do, and that's our role. At the same time, some of the roles we are doing in civil society is exactly like this. To, discuss, debate like this, share views, positions, and so on, so that people are enlightened, people, are also taking interest in the process that is going on. We do this through media engagements, TV, radio, forums like this, and so forth and so. We also carry out a lot of sensitizations in the community so that people are going to be aware of these proposed amendments and so on. So we do something to to stand with the public, because usually civil society, we are the voice of the voiceless. At the same time, we also do something because we are watchdog institutions, and also to provide checks and balances to the government that is there. But like I said, we can only do so much, and so on.
Thank you. Quickly.
Yeah. Quickly, let me address the question on the electoral system that was raised by Mr. Delenda. Indeed, in agreeing with you, these are major changes. People are used to vote for an individual as a representative. Now you make a shift to where you will not be voting for an individual, but a political party. So these are changes, whether welcome or not, but these are changes that need time. Our lowest civil society, in this case, in terms of advocacy, in terms of raising awareness, providing that civic education, will be now to deal with how will citizens be well informed about changes. Remember, one of the constitutional provisions is that relates to the electoral system, is that the electoral system should be simple. So it should be appreciated by all citizens because they participate in that election. So time is very limited. The proposed roadmap by government is very limited. We cannot manage to do that civic education that will inform the citizens so that they agree to the proposal. The proposals are good. In terms of any proposal that is aimed at increasing the women, youths, and persons with disability is welcome. But how do we ensure that people appreciate this great shift from the simple system that they are used to into another? It's not something that can easily be implemented, otherwise it will raise a lot of concerns as it is implemented. So, like I mentioned, some of the proposed amendments or provisions are something that we agree on. But it's also important that the citizens are well informed. We bring this system and that system, how it will work out so that people appreciate what is likely to be done. So 2026, just shifting suddenly like that, it may not be adequate to reform the system.
On the first question about how the amendments affect marginalized people, I think what we're being told is that there will be increased representation for marginalized groups in Parliament. And this has to be interrogated a bit further. Because yes, you can have an electoral system that results in more equitable representation. But do we want representation for representation's sake, or want these people who elect or choose to go into Parliament to carry out specific functions? So what benefit do we get if we just have more women, but that does not translate into laws that are more reflective of the gender issues that we face as a country? What benefit do we have as a country if we have more persons with disability in Parliament, but do not have laws, or we do not have a Parliament that is able to effectively ensure that the executive puts in place policies that ensures fair or equitable opportunities for persons with disability? So the conversation should be beyond just representation. How can we make this representation more effective in a way that it matters? And that's what's missing from the proposals. And I agree with what Mr. Nyarenda said. How can you fundamentally change an electoral system so close to an election in a country where the sport ballots come out today, you fundamentally change the electoral system. And not only that, electoral processes are already currently underway. ECZ, I believe, has already issued a tender for ballots. But then you're changing the entire electoral system. How does that tie into the ballot tender that was already issued? ECZ is supposed to carry out voter registration, at least by the announcement was supposed to start in May. Redoing or redrawing the districts and boundaries requires fresh voter registration because you have entirely new constituencies. How can you do that so close to an election when you've already started carrying out the processes for the next election? How do we challenge the process? The last question, how do we challenge the process as civil society? I think we have to rely on the people. The ultimate power in this country, ultimate accountability rests in the people of Zambia. So if you speak out, the hope is that government will listen. It shouldn't be, like I mentioned earlier, something for chapter 1 only, but it should be something owned by all Zambians. We can only go so far. The cyber bills are an example. We're able to have them deferred and there were minor changes. Some of them we're proud of. The definition of critical information has been broadened, has been made more narrow. The provisions on sending multiple electronic messages has been limited. So there is some progress, but it's not enough in the way we hoped to see. But it's still some progress. So civil society can only go so far. It requires the people of Zambia to speak out over the issues that concern them. And go back to this process denies that opportunity to Zambia.
Thank you. Let's quickly have the last round of questions. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. You come along with you can't just give one last question. But please be brief. And if your question overlaps, I'm sorry if I cut you short. So let's start with the lady in front of you.
Good afternoon. Usually when such meetings are usually when there are such meetings, and people usually talk about person living with disabilities and their inclusion. So I was kindly asking if next time when you're having such meetings, at least you should include them instead of just discussing.
As panelists.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm one of the that is living with disabilities.
That is,
so I think our voices should be heard, and yeah, we are very.
that is well. Organized. Thank you so much. Next.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Moses Mwamutanga. Good afternoon, how are you? Okay, so my name is Moses Mwamutanga. The founder and chairperson of Davis Institute Zambia, a youth led non-governmental organization that has to do the same program just like Chapter 1 Foundation. We can say it's a baby of Chapter 1 because it's part of Chapter 1. So my question is, we've seen through the history tells us say every government has got its own agendas. We can start from Manakatwe, Mungomba, then also Committee of Expertise. You can see that from that, every time before elections, there is this same process that takes part. And most of the submissions by CSOs are ignored. Especially if we consider what happened in 1996, where 80% of the submissions by the CSOs were ignored. So, what are we doing as CSOs? You know, the Constitution starts with saying, we, the people of Zambia. Emphasis on we, the people of Zambia. That does not say we, the government. So, what should be the Constitution should be for the people of Zambia. Who are the people of Zambia? It's us. So, as CSOs, we need to step up. Let's gather and have one voice. Before the first debate, we have 30 days to give our submissions. If in that 30 days we can have one voice as CSOs and demand, let's utilize the media. No one can go against the media. So if all 8 CSOs can have the media to their back, trust me, that process can be done. So my question is, what are we
There's a
doing?
question. Yes. What are we doing as CSOs?
What are we doing as CSOs to make sure that all the Zambians are engaged and have one voice?
Thank you. Thank you. Next.
Okay, good evening. My name is Emmanuel. I'm a student from NIPA. And it's a very good question. What are we doing as CSOs? Well, we're doing a lot. We're actually doing a lot. There's a lot of skepticism around.
Okay, what's your question? What's your question?
So, like, on project,
okay, yes, but ask your question. Ask your question.
This is not the question. It's a very critical concern.
Okay.
So I think my concern is borders on the fact that I think the structural mechanism in which our constitution has been approached as far as amendment is concerned has largely been politicized. And I think you can agree with this. And like you asked the question, what are we doing? I think we're doing a lot, but one of the reasons why it seems as though we're not doing enough is because of these same political affiliations. Because a lot of CSOs are there by trying to do a lot of advocacy, but most of them are politically affiliated. So you discover that there will be several recommendations that might be alluded to, but you find that some CSOs will be advocating for or against because of their political affiliations. And among the reasons why the Zambian constitution has not attained the respect it deserves is because it has not attained that level of representation that it deserves as far as the people are concerned. Like he said,
please make your last point. We have run out.
It's a lot though. But I think my appeal is that the government is not as it seems. The government is with the people. These that we elect are just as an administration. And so I think if we're beginning from that context, it will be better for us because then we'll have that power. My colleague here speak about the power structure as far as the constitution is concerned. Look at Article 160 of the Constitution, for example, which states that the president has the power to appoint members of parliament as ministers, as the number is not really stipulated. You find that there isn't that much separation of power, even in the three arms of government. This can only tell you that the executive has been one wing of government that has the tendency of exploiting other organs of government.
Right. Thank you so much. I think.
Are you sure?
Yes, you entered into your point. Thank you so much. Yes.
Hi everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Martha, and my question is: seeing that amendments have already been made, what collaborative actions can we take as youths who are in here to ensure inclusivity for people that do not even make it to these debates? That's on the issue of challenges. Like there are people that are sitting out there but have no idea that these debates that are going on. So what collaborative actions can we take from here, from this debate that we're having, to ensure that people that have no idea of the amendments that are going on know about them? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Is that the last time, sir? Yes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Purity Makonga. I'm a PhD student coming from Communications University. Yeah, so my question goes to the panelists. So if we go back in the history of Zambia, we'll see that each government that comes into place, they demand constitutional amendment. Now, is this going to be necessary that each particular government that comes into power are going to amend the constitution? Is it favoring us, the citizens of Zambia, or is it favoring them? Because in the first place, if we're taking a look at democracy, it talks for us, it is for the people. Now, if they amend the constitution and it is favoring them as political parties or as the government in power, how is it working for us as citizens of Zambia? Thank you so much, I said.
Thank you. Let's have the last one.
Thank you very much. My name is Chilufia Ngoza, a fourth-year law student at the University of Zambia. My question rides very much on purities, in that taking into consideration the supremacy of the Constitution, and if each and every individual problem we have with these proposed amendments is solved, what guarantee do we have that this is a constitutional amendment to end all constitutional amendments? Because from my observation, we do not seem to have a particular problem with the amendments in and of themselves. We have specific problems with the content of the amendments. So what guarantee do we have that if these amendments, if the problems we have, let's say with process or content, are taken care of, that there won't be another amendment, say, in the next 5 years from now? Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. There's the last question.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Inoge Siamana. I'm a fourth year law student at the University of Zambia. So what measures and strategies have been put in place to ensure that these constitutional amendments are not politically motivated?
Thank you. I think we have about 3-4 questions. The rest were contributions. So you can quickly respond to one that's
I wanted to respond to the submission that the amendments have already been made. I think I would like to disagree. What the position currently is proposals. These are we are still at the proposal stage to amend. We are not yet, not that they have already been. Please correct that. That is not true. Also, I also wanted to respond to the party. I'm sure I don't. That should be enough. Huh? I don't have to go on and on, so that will give the other people to talk. What currently has been proposed again, I'll come to that. The person who talked about avoiding doing this again. We can only avoid this by doing a constitutional making process. What has the government proposed are temporal measures, making an amendment to limited clauses only, unless we take a process called the constitutional making. That's why I said there's a difference. What government has proposed currently is just making changes to a few clauses, which is 13 of them. A lot of other issues are still there, which may be needs and so on. So until we undertake the constitutional making process, surely we shall still do this again and again and so forth.
Let me comment on Martha's question. How we can ensure inclusivity, especially to ensure that we have persons with disability, included, not only as the participants in the audience, but on the panel. I think this is more to do with the organizers. The last engagement that we had representatives as panelists from women and the youths. Yeah, so I think maybe the next, I think it's important that we have, representation of persons with disability so that they can, share their views from, living experience. Let me deal also with the last two questions because they are related. So we can avoid the repetition of having these amendments each time government comes in by first dealing with a broad or having a broad-based consultations that will lead to consensus on the process and also the content. The last question related to, if you like, politically motivated content in this case. So if we have a process that will take a bottom-up approach, then we are allowing the citizens to drive what should be contained in the Constitution. Citizens should determine what should be contained in the Constitution. Now, when there is that broad consensus, like I earlier mentioned, where you also include those in part, for example, members of parliament, they participate together with the citizens. If there is genuine commitment, one, to ensure that the process protects the content, we are likely to have the desired outcome such that even if the next government, is changed, because they were part of the consultation and agreed resolutions of what should be contained, I don't think they will go for immediate amendments. Now, if we proceed with the current approach, I can assure you, if government changes in 2026, those who will come in, including ourselves, who are denied to some of the contents that are bad, that we feel they will affect our democracy, we will go for fresh process that will lead to, amendments that can be progressive, that will be well for the country. So to avoid that, government has got an opportunity right now to embrace all the stakeholders. Already in the consultations. Let's agree. Let's reach that consensus at least. According to, or in line with, the president's commitment when he addressed Parliament during the first session, where all the people should be consulted. They've got this opportunity that will ensure that we have a people-driven constitution. So they need to change their approach from this contentious approach to non-contentious approach. That's all.
Thank you.
To respond to some of the questions, I think the point about ensuring that there is representation from persons with disabilities is very accurate, and Chapter 1's taken note for future fora such as this, on what we are doing to ensure Zambians participate in this conversation. We have to keep sharing our perspectives, opinions, creating platforms for Zambians to dialogue and share and express their opinions, such as this, but it shouldn't be left to a specific sector or specific stakeholders to do. It's an obligation for all of us. On the point about the amendments being made, and I think that was responded to and clarified that these are proposals, and this sort of speaks to this confusion that we're having now. If the government is saying they're proposals to who? And then at what stage do those people approve these proposals or reject them? It's not clear from this stage. The way it looks like it's proposals to themselves. It's almost like they're handing over power to themselves. But yeah. How is the constitution or the current process working for us, the Zambian people? I think that's where our concerns stem from around this process. We don't just wake up one day and have accountable institutions. We don't just wake up one day and have an independent judiciary. You have to deliberately design the institutions in a way that achieves these goals. And this process denies us that opportunity to design institutions that effectively work for the Zambian people. And that's why we need to reflect and debate, see what we can do better. On the constitutional amendments, to end all amendments, whenever we have these conversations, I always think about, I think there are some studies done on the lifespan of the Constitution, and generally between 12 and 15 years before people say, okay, we need to change something. And even then, constitutions are sometimes changed in their application by court decisions and so on, because the Constitution is a living document. It reflects the will and desire of the Zambian people. Imagine if we had been bound by our forefathers and Zambia remained a one-party state without the option to change it. So governance changes. We understand democracy better. We understand our context better. We need to limit power. We need to give power to different institutions. So that calls for a process where you, from time to time, reflect on what the governance structure looks like. So, for instance, we created a constitutional court in 2016. It might not have worked out properly for Zambians. How do we reflect on that? And there are lessons we can learn from other countries. South Africa tried the same experiment as we have, and they changed it after some time because it wasn't working. So, the constitution-making process in its design, firstly, should address the key issues that affect the Zambian people. But then we should remember that as society, our perspectives change. How we understand governance changes. I always think of Kenya and some of the challenges they've faced over the last few years. They amended their constitution some time back, and it was viewed by many as a really good constitution. But today it doesn't seem to speak to the aspirations of young people. When you ask young people, how do you think parliamentarians or parliament should act? How do you think the executive should act? They have a completely different perspective, and their constitution doesn't address their needs. And that's why they have all this volatility about, they want to remove the president and so on. So I think for the safety of the nation, it's also important to reflect on the constitution from time to time. Other countries have inbuilt processes to allow this. Other countries have tied themselves so tightly that they can't change their constitution. For instance, the USA. It's not because they don't see the need to change the constitution, it's because it's very difficult to change the constitution that they do it. What measures have been put in place to ensure that this process is not politically motivated? There are no measures that have been put in place to ensure this process is not politically motivated. Because if we say we want to take power away from the executive, but then you give the executive the driving seat in the reforms, do you think they'll take away their own power? They won't. If you give politicians to drive the process, as has happened in the past, if you give politicians, and this is what happens when you present a bill to Parliament, they change it. This point was made earlier. From the 2016 constitutional amendment, there was an entire part on provincial assemblies that was removed in Parliament. So if you leave politicians in charge of the process, do you think they'll address the needs of their constituents, or rather they'll look at their immediate needs? So in the process, the way it's been designed, it doesn't address the risks and threats that come with constitution making. Some of those risks are polarization. How do you avoid polarization? You undertake a process of consensus building. It's only at the funeral of Mrs. Nawaf where the president said, let's dialogue and have consensus. That should have happened a long time ago. How else do you avoid some of the risks that come with constitution making? You identify an independent body to perhaps draft the process. You enact legislation to protect the content. In Kenya, for example, they had a committee of experts that drafted the constitution, and they limited the role and responsibilities of the different organs of the government. Parliament was not empowered to change what the committee of experts drafted. They were to approve. The president couldn't change it. He had to approve it. You can guard in the design, you can guard the content that addresses the concerns of Zambian people. In this process, it's not guarded.